So our first speaker is Matt McRae, who is a Climate and Energy Analyst for the City of Eugene, Oregon. Matt is going to share some lessons from Eugene around what walkability is and how to get it. So please help me welcome Matt.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here. I'm going to jump right in. My name's Matt McRae. I come from the City of Eugene, where I work as a Climate and Energy Analyst and have done some work on our 20-minute neighborhoods assessment, which has informed some of the work that I'm going to share with you tonight. Again, thanks for having me. So here's where I'm headed. I'm going to talk really briefly about my neighborhood, and then I'm going to talk about why complete and walkable neighborhoods are important. I'm going to touch briefly on Fort Collins today, and then talk about some things that we've learned in Eugene. How can we make things even better? So first, my neighborhood. This is my wife and I and our child and dog in our first home that we purchased in Eugene in 2004. At the time, we didn't understand how much we'd benefit from living in a complete walkable neighborhood. We knew that we had landed ourselves in a great spot. There was a park nearby and a grocery store nearby that wasn't anything to brag about. It's not huge, but it has produce, had a deli, and it had some outdoor seating that really has turned into a magnet, a conversation center for the community. What we learned is that that people in this area of town get around, they meet some of their daily needs just by walking. And what we learned in the process of doing that ourselves is that we met our neighbors, we met new families just on the way down to the market. And it was a different circumstance than we had lived in before. So while we didn't know it at the time, this neighborhood would really change the way that we lived. The school was nearby, and there were a bunch of amenities in close proximity. So I'm going to take just a second and define walkability. And when I talk about walkability, so it's not just about the presence or absence of a sidewalk. That's not what I'm hitting on. It's really not even about walking per se. It's about the ability to meet our needs without relying on an automobile to do it. Not all of our needs, but some of them. And bikes, wheelchairs, skateboards, and many other tools help to make this possible. So really briefly, here's a map of our neighborhood with our home in the middle there. And I'm going to draw a slightly arbitrary, but a half-mile radius around our home. So that's about a 10-minute walk for me. And with my kid, it's a slow walk. And there's nothing magic about the half mile, but it gives you a sense of the area around my home. And nearby is the grocery store that I mentioned to you, the park nearby, with 3 other ones within pretty close distance if that's where we'd rather go. The school, again, nearby. A corner market in case you wake up in the morning and you don't have cream for your coffee. It's crucial. Bus stops, again, in close proximity, if what was nearby wasn't meeting our needs. I encourage you to think about doing this in your own neighborhood and see what you have close by, because that's really what we're talking about here, is it's access to the things that we need to get to on a regular basis. So now I'm going to talk about why complete walkable neighborhoods, and you already know this, so I'm going to go over it fairly quickly, but the point here is to remind you that there are a number of reasons which we would like to go this direction. Obviously, improving air quality, driving less particulate pollution helps everybody's health in a number of ways. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, I don't think I have to say a lot about that. It also provides more affordable and equitable access for more people. More people can get around without having to own a car, which is incredibly expensive. In Fort Collins, the average person spends $12,000 a year on an automobile. Reduced auto accidents if people aren't driving as much. Transportation cost savings, I just mentioned that. Huge amounts of money that people are spending on automobiles. We have the same condition in Eugene. Less time in traffic. So if we're able to meet our needs within walking distance, we're just not doing that. And you all done that and you don't like it. Another reason, and we don't talk about this very often, is keeping dollars local. Does anybody know how much you spend collectively in Fort Collins on transportation fuels every year? Any guesses? Anybody willing to hazard a guess? All right, I'll give it to you then. About $220 million a year that you spend on transportation fuels. $220 million a year. So this comes from the Fort Collins Climate Action Plan. They added up the gallons and I multiplied it by the price you pay per gallon. Holy cow, right? So this is the way your dollar is spent. 51% goes to crude oil, 23% to refining, 8% to distribution and marketing, and 18% to taxes. So some 75% of these dollars are exported. Now, I want to recognize there's a little bit of oil production in Fort Collins, not very much, so I'm ignoring that for the point here. 75% of your dollars are exported. Every year, that's about $165 million every year that leave your community and leave your economy. So the next benefit, health. And again, you know this, but I don't know if you've seen this before. This is done by the Centers for Disease Control. This is a map of age-adjusted prevalence of obesity among US adults. The yellow there, the lemon yellow, is 14 to 17%, and the lighter color is 14%. When you can see Colorado there, right? You're going to like this because you're all well ahead of the rest of us for the entire duration, but it's still a pretty sad state. So you're at under 14% of adults in Colorado suffering from obesity. In 1995, it starts to move, so I'm going to just click through here. 1997, 98. Right? In 2006, now you've got between 18 and 21% of your population in the state suffering from obesity. Not overweight, obese. A minor change in the methodology here, but not significant. Holy cow, right? So there are reasons for us to think about walkability, and it's not just about saving dollars at the fuel pump. This is one of the ways we can tackle obesity, right, is get our young people thinking about walking to school as one method. It's not going to solve the problem, but it's one way that helps us get there. So how about Fort Collins today? Has anybody seen walkscore.com? How many of you are familiar with that tool? So a handful of you. So forgive me for those of you that are familiar with it. I'm going to just show you Fort Collins WalkScore. If you haven't been there, it's pretty interesting. So WalkScore is an online website. They measure a handful of things. Distance to amenities, we talked about that within my neighborhood. Population density, a really important factor. How many people live in that area? And intersection density, another really key factor that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but really it's about the size of the blocks and how connected are the blocks and the sidewalks and the routes to get places. Do I have to walk out a direction for a lot of my travel, or can I get somewhere directly? So this is Fort Collins, and the green is more walkable, the yellow is less walkable. And as you would expect, the downtown and Old Town area of Fort Collins more walkable than the rest of town. So how can we change this? How can we increase the walkability? There are three general categories. I have a handout that I'm happy to share afterwards that goes into more detail on all three of these categories. Increasing connectivity, adding services where people live, and adding people where services live. And I'm going to really briefly give a couple examples. So increasing connectivity, that can be adding bike lanes, making sure you have complete sidewalks, adding off-street bike and pedestrian paths. Fortunately, you have some folks here in Fort Collins that are doing a great job in this area, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. There's an existing, really thoughtful pedestrian plan that's being implemented right now, hence the construction just down the road here. There's also similarly a Fort Collins bike plan that does an admirable job. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but here are a couple other things that we can think about. Keeping services where people live. This used to be a Safeway 20 years ago in Eugene. It's a smaller store. It's in a downtown area. It wasn't meeting Safeway's business model anymore. They don't want to maintain small businesses. They're small shops. They wanted the larger, more distributed or more dispersed stores. Fewer, larger stores is the model for grocery stores. We have a nonprofit in Eugene, the Neighborhood Economic Development Corporation, who partnered with the City of Eugene and Bank of America to provide funding to a person who was interested in operating this store. And they managed to maintain this as a grocery store, keeping the connection and the access for the people that live in this area. So something that's really important is where we have neighborhood services and we value them, we have to use them. We have to patronize those businesses if we want them to remain. And there are things that we can do as a community to help them stay in place. But we can also add services where people live. So Fort Collins is no different than any other city in this country where we've added huge seas of homes over the last 30 or 40 years. Many of you may live in those places where it's just homes and homes, and there are very few commercial services. We can add commercial services in those areas if we like. One of the things that we've done in Eugene, we have a number of corner stores called Dairy Mart, and it's not unlike a 7-Eleven or other convenience store like you have here, but it's a locally owned chain which helped. They've got large parking lots. They're conveniently distributed throughout town. And Lane Coalition for Healthy Active Youth partnered with Dairy Mart to add produce trucks in front of those Dairy Marts on a regular basis to try and bring back some of the full-service grocery, moving us that direction. Granted, this isn't a full-service grocery store, but it pushes that direction with just a little bit of incremental change. And finally, another example, we can put more people where services live. So this is a corner in downtown Eugene about 2 years ago. It's primarily, there's a one-story building there. It's primarily surface level parking. It's got great proximity to theaters, grocery store, all kinds of services within very close walking distance. And now there are 700 new housing units right in that spot. So we have a larger portion of Eugenians now in an area that's walkable. So it's another tool that we can use to help move us in the right direction. So again, these are the three strategies, just the three categories that I would suggest. And I have more to share if you're interested in discussing this in the breakout tables. But what I really wanted to say is that there are a number of ways that we can increase the connectivity and the accessibility to the services that we all rely on a daily basis. While most of what I've talked about here is somewhat technical in nature, really what we've learned is that walkable neighborhoods are thriving communities. They're the places where it feels safe to let the 10-year-old walk the dog because they're the place where we know our neighbors. Thank you.